webinar sponsored by the Society for the Advancement of Violence and Injury Research, or SAVR. My name is Fred Rivara. I'm from the University of Washington, and I'm former president of the organization. As you settle in, let me give you a brief overview of what SAVR does. It's a professional organization that was formed to provide leadership and foster excellence in the science of preventing and treating injury and violence. We are a leader in injury and violence prevention research. We offer expertise in the development of research programs and policies. We offer teaching and mentoring programs for students and early career researchers. We offer collaboration with practitioners and policymakers with the goal of bridging research, practice, and policy. SAVR is also a very strong and present advocate for improved resources and funding in the field. We all know that there is not enough money in the field currently, and SAVR has been very focused on advancing global injury and violence research and increasing membership across the world. There are a number of benefits to joining SAVR, and I hope that all of those who are listening today will do so. Membership comes with professional development and networking opportunities through our conferences, committee involvement, and webinars. Benefits also include a mentoring program. This is initially designed for students and early career researchers, and now actually has two different kinds of programs. One that offers a traditional, more senior mentor, helping to mentor a graduate student or a junior faculty member, but also peer-to-peer mentoring. We offer access to course syllabi, advocacy training materials, and webinars. There are discounts to our national conference, and our next conference will be in Michigan in 2017. We had a conference last year in New Orleans, which was a great success. Our benefits also include online access to the Journal Injury Prevention, leadership opportunity through standing and expert committees, and access to timely information and position statements in the injury and violence field. If you'd like more information about the organization, including information about the next conference and our membership benefits, please go to the website shown on the slide. Well, it's my pleasure then to introduce our speaker, who is Dr. Dennis Durbin. Dennis is the director of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia Research Institute's Office of Clinical and Translational Research. Before taking on this role in 2014, he served as co-scientific director for the Center for Injury Research and Prevention at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia for 17 years. He is also a professor of pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania Perelman School of Medicine, and attending physician in Division of Emergency Medicine at CHOP. His research interests are in the area of pediatric injury epidemiology, with particular emphasis on the prevention of motor vehicle occupant injuries to children and the prevention of teen driver crashes. A significant portion of his current responsibilities as Director of Clinical and Translation Research at CHOP is devoted to junior faculty development. He serves on a number of departmental and institutional committees focused on enhancing the career development and research training of junior faculty. Over the past 2 decades, he has mentored over 30 trainees and junior faculty to become physician scientists, with many now thriving in independent research careers. He recently completed a sabbatical from which he facilitated the implementation of a research mentor training curriculum for faculty at Penn. He developed new training materials to the curriculum that was originally developed at the University of Wisconsin. So I'll turn over the screen and this presentation to Dr. Durbin.
Thanks very much, Fred. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to give this webinar to SAVR. I'm pleased to be able to share some of my experience in the area of building effective mentoring relationships, both from my many years of experience, as you mentioned, mentoring, as well as some more intentional work on identifying some best practices of mentors. And I really, the way I see this webinar is to initially just raise your awareness about some of the issues involved in doing effective career development and mentoring of junior researchers. I'll spend a little bit of time at the beginning just talking about really defining what I mean by mentoring and some of the variations on the theme of mentoring that some of you may have experience with, as well as various roles that any particular person can play in the career development of someone else. And then on the assumption that mentoring involves both an aptitude on the part of individuals who are committed to doing it, as well as some specific learnable skills in doing mentoring at a very high level, I'll raise awareness on just 4 particular skills in the areas of communications, expectation setting, promoting professional development, and incorporating work-life integration into your mentoring practice. And along the way, I'll point you in the direction of a number of resources, many of which are available on the web for you to enhance your mentoring practice. And I should note that these slides will be available on the SABRE website after the webinar, because there are a number of websites that are included in the slides that you may or may not have time to jot down as we go through the presentation here. So just to start, to make sure we're all on the same page regarding what we're talking about, what is mentoring? Well, based on this word diagram, you can see mentoring may mean many different things to many different people. And I think it's helpful just to start out with some common definitions of what I'm going to be focusing my comments on. So this is a definition of mentoring that's 25 years old. You'll see from the reference in the lower right-hand corner, but it includes some elements that I really think are critical to a true mentoring relationship. And I've bolded in red here some of the key words in this definition that I think really define what a true mentoring relationship is. First of all, it's dynamic and reciprocal, and it is a relationship. Dynamic implying that it changes over time, and reciprocal implying that typically in a classic mentoring relationship there are 2 parties involved, as this definition assumes. And those 2 parties interact with one another. It's not one way from the more senior to the more junior person. And at the end of the definition, I think 3 key words. It involves obviously the development typically of the junior faculty person, but again, people who I think are highly effective and accomplished mentors would recognize that they also benefit and develop as a mentor, sometimes as a scientist, as a result of the relationship, and it leads to the fulfillment of both parties. So, one thing I just wanted to make the point of here with this definition is that it's not a one-way relationship. There really is benefit for both parties, and it is reciprocal in nature. Now this, of course, is a very classic definition of mentoring. And mentoring may exist along this kind of continuum from very informal relationships to highly structured formal relationships. And I think many of us who may be participating in this webinar today who are viewing this from the role of a mentor would probably acknowledge that many of our mentoring relationships would best be categorized as somewhat informal in the sense that they were created because you got together with someone else around common interests, or you thought you could work effectively together. And it was kind of a handshake deal where, sure, I'll help you in your career development, we'll get together whenever we need to, and we'll see where things go. At the other end of that spectrum is a more formal relationship that typically is more strategic in its origin. Sometimes mentoring relationships in different institutions are determined by someone else, a third party, be that a department chair or a division chief who decides that this junior person will be mentored by some other senior person, and it's more of an arranged marriage. Those are often tied not only to the personal objectives of the junior person, but also to organizational objectives. And there are typically more often specific success metrics and timelines that define those relationships. And again, the really good ones may involve training, both for the mentor and the mentee, so that they get the most value out of the relationship. Now, I wouldn't say by this slide that the most effective mentoring relationships need to be at one end of this spectrum or the other. This is simply put here to acknowledge that effective mentoring relationships can exist along this continuum. The point of this is so that you can help recognize in your own relationships where you might be on this continuum, because that leads to many of the other skills that I'll be pointing out. And then as we sort of jump into this discussion of mentoring, I wanted to point out that You know, if we're thinking in general here about contributing to the success of a junior researcher and assisting someone with the development of a successful career, we have to acknowledge that there are obviously individual determinants of that success. Here are some that were identified. Assist them. And you know, not every environment looks like the Google environment. That works for Google. That probably isn't going to work for many academic research centers. But just recognize that mentoring is one of many determinants of success. And so I don't want to set unrealistic expectations that it's all about mentoring. I consider mentoring a necessary but not sufficient determinant of an individual's success in an academic research career. I think it's very hard to be successful without effective mentoring, but you certainly need much more than just mentoring in order for most people to be successful. So I just wanted to also place the concept of mentoring into a broader context of determinants of success. And so now that we kind of have a sense of what it is we're talking about when we're talking about career development and mentoring, let's just recognize that there can be a number of different people involved in that. So we're going to focus today on the role of the mentor. And again, I use that term very specifically in a way that reflects the definition that I showed earlier. So this is the person who is focused on the career development of someone else, and there can often be tension created by that reciprocal dynamic relationship. Both parties kind of depend on one another. And whenever you're in that situation, of course, there's lots of upside to that, but it sometimes comes with some challenges, and we should just be aware of that. Others that play complementary roles in the process of a career development, of course, include people in roles of leadership, you know, organizational leadership, like department chairs, division chiefs, center directors, whatever your organizational structure might be. These folks are typically in the role of being able to provide opportunities and resources to someone in the course of their career development. But of course, a good leader like this always has the overall mission of a group in mind. And so we all work in areas of limited resources, and so department chairs and division chiefs and leaders like this sometimes make decisions that aren't in the best interest of an individual in their group because that decision is for the betterment of the group in general. You'll see folks who serve in the role of what I would call an advisor, and I think these folks can be either more technical in nature, so depending upon the particular area of research interest for a junior person, if their primary mentor doesn't have some technical expertise, they may go somewhere else to get some of that technical expertise, and I might characterize that person as an advisor in the career development and really distinguish that from the role of the mentor, which is a little bit more holistic. This also could be someone that is what I would characterize as a neutral third party. I can tell you here at CHOP in the Department of Pediatrics, we do have a program of faculty advising where we intentionally identify senior faculty members from outside the division or department of the junior faculty to be sort of a neutral third party, recognizing the potential tensions that may exist from the mentors and department chairs and division chiefs that I've mentioned. And then, of course, there are collaborators and co-investigators that can be involved in career development and provide lots of great expertise that a junior person can learn from. These relationships are typically focused on a specific work product or a project, don't always include, again, that more holistic view of the faculty member's career development, which is generally the purview of the mentor. And then, as Fred mentioned in his opening comments there, he made reference to peer mentors. This is certainly a concept that complements, what I offered as the classical definition of the the dyad of the more senior professional and the more junior protege. I think peer mentors serve very critical roles in environments when there are limited access to senior mentors, when you've got junior researchers who are in environments that don't necessarily have an abundance of more senior folks available. Some of the advantages, I think, of peer mentors are that they have the similar current experience that the junior person has. And so I know in my own mentoring, when I'm advising folks on where to go for funding sources and how to execute that, some of my knowledge of the way I did it 10 or 15 years ago is just simply not relevant anymore. And I recognize that and typically encourage many of my mentees to identify a small peer group of mentors that are going through the same things that they're going through and share that experience with one another so that each individual doesn't have to keep reinventing the wheel. And so essentially what all of this results in is this sort of model where ideally a mentee identifies the various areas of support and the various roles that they need for their professional development, and they will often go to many different individuals for these different component parts. And so in many respects, the initial definition that I offered is a little bit outdated these days in science, in the sense that I think today we see effective mentoring really being done by teams of mentors that may involve one or a small number of senior faculty who do kind of have clarified roles about the different component parts of career development that they're taking responsibility for. And that's augmented by a committed peer group. I think I would call that an ideal situation, but as is the case in many ideal situations, I'm not sure it exists very often. And in one way that you can sort of put this together, even in areas of limited resources, is to involve remote team members. And as Fred mentioned in his opening comments, SABRE has a mentoring program that, sort of by definition, provides remote expertise to folks who may not be able to identify it in their own home institution. And at the end of my presentation, I'll put a slide up with a website where you can go for more information about SABRE's mentoring program. I participated in it myself. I think it's a really terrific program and does provide this ability to sort of extend the capacity for mentoring beyond the four walls of whatever institution you might find yourself in. And of course, we have to think about how do we measure the effectiveness of mentoring. There are a number of different models that have been put forth. Again, this white paper that was published a couple of years ago in Clinical and Translational Science summarized at that point the sort of existing literature on how different programs have tried to assess the effectiveness of the mentoring that's going on in their institution. And I would say that the first three columns here have to do with process metrics. They either have to do with components of the relationship, the roles that the mentor might be playing, or these kind of aptitudes of what are considered good mentors. Some can be more in the fourth column, which I would consider more of the outcomes, the impact outcomes. Does effective mentoring really increase research activity? Does it result in more grants, more publications? These are obviously, this column is filled with the traditional metrics for academic success. And I would say that my read of the existing literature would say that relating effective mentoring to any of these kind of hard metrics of academic success is the holy grail of evaluating mentoring effectiveness. I don't think anyone has been able to demonstrate that, and frankly, I think it's essentially impossible to do because, as I said a few minutes ago, I consider effective mentoring to be necessary but far from sufficient to ensure somebody's success in an academic research environment. And so I wanted to just highlight now, again, with this notion that while effective mentors may have certain aptitudes, they also demonstrate various specific skills, and those skills can be learned. I don't think that effective mentors are born that way, and I've been involved for several years in implementing a research mentor training program for faculty here at Penn. We've adapted these materials that are shown here on this slide that were developed at the University of Wisconsin. You see the website that's there is a place where you can go to you register and then download various resources so that you can kind of put together your own curriculum in mentor training at your institution. And we've done this here at the University of Pennsylvania for about 5 years now. And I have to say I really like this curriculum in no small part because it's actually been evaluated. You can see the reference there for academic medicine from a year ago. The group here in Wisconsin conducted a 16-center, multi-center randomized controlled trial looking at a variety of outcomes of mentor behavior in a group that either got this training or did not. And the long and short of it is the group that received the training demonstrated far better competence on a number of skills that were important to the mentees as well as the mentors. You see here on the slide the different topics that are included in that training curriculum. And you can, the way it's organized on the website is you can take the whole thing or you can take bits and pieces of it and customize the curriculum to however you would like. And I just wanted to draw your attention to 4 components that are in there because I think these are really critically important in sort of foundational in any mentor training program. In that program, there are 26 different skills that are identified in effective mentoring. And again, there's a very cumbersome website here available. This, again, the slides will be available after the presentation on SABR's website. But if you want to know how these guys evaluated mentoring, this is it. There's a number of different measurable skills, and they were evaluated both by self-report of the mentor as well as by a report of the mentee. These are just sort of the buckets in which those skills fall, and you can see that they run quite a large gamut from communications and expectation setting, coordination with other mentors, sort of self-awareness about your own implicit biases, the ability to facilitate networking, a very important issue on negotiating a path to independence. So there's a number of different behaviors and skills that the curriculum is targeted to, and many of them are listed here. But I wanted to start with the communications issue because in my personal experience and in my experience overseeing a number of mentors and participating in this training curriculum, ineffective communications are at the root of many mentoring problems. And so the point in the curriculum when it comes to enhancing communications is really making mentors aware of their own communication style and the style that is kind of the go-to style for their mentee. Because that when you're aware of what your kind of go-to communication style is and whether it aligns well or it doesn't align well with that of your mentee, effective mentors figure out how to adapt the communication style to enhance communications. And the curriculum is generally case-based, so cases are sort of presented and discussed. In this particular topic area, there's also a tool that is proposed to be used. And I have to say I've done this several times in the mentor training curriculum, and I really like this particular tool. Some of you may be familiar with other kinds of tools that are used to assess people's communication styles. This is one particular one, and the way it works is basically there's, as you see here, there's 4 columns of words, 15 rows. As part of the exercise, the person, for every row of 4 words, you circle the 2 words that you think most reflect you in the workplace. And so you go through and you circle 2 words per row and you total up the number of circles in each column, and you see the columns are headed W, X, Y, Z, and those numbers essentially form coordinates on this 4-axis graph, and so you use your numbers on each column to be coordinates and you draw a box. And for most people, their box will straddle all four of the quadrants on here. And you can see the quadrants are labeled in different ways. Some people may have a really particularly dominant collaborating or communication style, and so most of their box will be in one quadrant. I've seen over the course of doing this with about 75 or 80 faculty, I would say for the most part, academic researchers who voluntarily come to a mentor training curriculum find themselves with their boxes straddle all four coordinates. And then once you've got your box drawn, you look in for each of those each of those quadrants, the thinking, planning, the supporting, collaborating, doing or directing, envisioning, creating. There are these notions of the ways in which you like to give and receive information and how you tend to communicate when you're under stress. And I think in my experience of doing this a couple of times and guiding many others to do it, for most folks what they find is validating for what you already knew. This tool is not designed to uncover ways in which you communicate that might be a surprise to you. I've never had anybody who was surprised by what they found. What I think the tool is really useful for, again, is number one, raising your awareness of your go-to style. Particularly that notion of under stress, how do you typically communicate? Again, I've had many people validate what this tool kind of says about the way they communicate under stress, because of course in an academic research environment we're frequently under stress of deadlines and grant submissions, etc. And understanding how you communicate in those situations, and frankly how your mentee communicates in those situations, provides a language to discuss challenges with mentees. So again, I've had the personal experience of recognizing that I'm not communicating effectively with someone. We do this tool sort of individually, and then that gives us a language to use in a very non-judgmental way of saying, I see that you like to get your information this way, and this is the way you hear things, so I've got to adapt my communications a little bit to align more closely with yours. So this is an example of what, a best practice, what highly effective, high-functioning mentors are capable of doing. In the area of aligning expectations, I would call this the other major root of most mentoring problems that I've witnessed, and that is the failure of the mentor and mentee to clearly align their expectations for what they want to get out of the relationship. And again, this frequently happens on that more informal end of the continuum of mentoring relationships, where there's kind of a handshake and a, yeah, I'll try to help you, but you don't take the time to sit down and clearly express what assumptions each party has coming into the relationship and what they each want to get out of it. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about aligning expectations. And, I think one of the central questions that always has to be asked at the very beginning of a mentoring relationship is, who's in charge of this career development goal that we have here for the junior person? As I like to say sometimes, who's driving the bus? And I think a lot of times mentees assume that the mentor is going to tell them everything they need to do and is going to ensure the success of the mentee. And I think most mentors would think that it's the mentee's career, the mentee should take ownership of it and drive the bus. The truth of the matter is it needs to be a little bit of a shared driver relationship. Sometimes the mentee is principally the driver. Sometimes the mentor is principally the driver. But unless you sort of take time at the beginning of the relationship to sort of clearly describe how that's going to work, this is where misalignment on the part of either party can really cause a problem in a relationship. So, again, the curriculum is designed to, again, raise awareness and give mentors an opportunity to practice having these early conversations that cover a number of these very important topics to discuss. Something as simple and as mundane as how often are we going to actually meet? And is it going to be every Tuesday at 1 o'clock? Well, let's put it on our calendars. I mean, it's sort of remarkable to me how often I hear about mentors or mentees in relationships, and there are no standing meetings. There's no regular time that the two come together. And again, I think that's a recipe for misaligned expectations, because if you aren't connecting on a regular basis, it's likely that the two of you are working with a very different set of expectations and assumptions. So, again, the curriculum is designed to encourage these kinds of early conversations, and the way in which there are some tangible tools that mentors can use in structuring these conversations. They're generally known as mentor-mentee compacts. A word very close to contract, but not really a contract, because of course there's nothing legal about this. But you'll find if you search the web under mentor-mentee compacts, you'll see a number of different examples of them. I would say that they generally fall into 3 different formats. I'm showing you here an example of one that's very checklist oriented. So, this is obviously easy to do. I think it actually has fairly limited utility, but if you had nothing else but a checklist in front of you of different topics that you wanted to be sure you got on the table with your mentee or your mentor, well, then this wouldn't be a bad place to start. Others, like this one from the Mayo Clinic, are more of what I would call a series of I promise statements and sort of explicit expectations on the part of both in this case they're calling it the scholar, the junior person, as well as the primary mentor. And you'll see most of these forms that you'll find require a signature, again, which is the way in which you try to make somewhat more formal and structured this commitment on the part of both parties to a common set of expectations for the relationship. I think at the end of the day, this is how I would kind of net out a suggested guide for very early or initial conversations. And frankly, even if you find yourself in the middle of a mentoring relationship now, it's not a bad idea the next time you get together with your partner to have a check-in on some of these kinds of issues. What are the goals of this relationship? How are we going to achieve those? How often are we going to get together, and how are we going to communicate with one another, and how will we know if we're actually making progress in this relationship? And that brings me to the third topic of promoting professional development. So again, just to be clear, that aligning expectations topic typically is relevant at the front end of a mentoring relationship. It's sort of like, how do we get this relationship off to a good start? Promoting professional development is more about how do you manage that relationship over time to ensure that both parties are getting what they need from it. And in the mentor training curriculum, a lot of this topic is focused on encouraging mentors to use these so-called IDPs, or individual development plans. These are very common in the basic science research world, in wet bench laboratory research. I think when you talk to basic scientists who are used to mentoring graduate students and postdocs, they're quite familiar with the concept of an IDP. Those of us who do more population-based research, more clinical or translational research, I don't think these have been as widely adopted. But again, it's a tool. I'll show you an example of one that I think is highly effective, but it's a tool that's designed to foster the professional development of the junior person, typically by making more explicit and more tangible a variety of goals and objectives. There are opportunities to check in on very specific, scientific skills that the junior person should be developing. And if not, then strategies for how to help the person develop those skills. And again, I see this as very much a living document, a living tool, once the relationship is underway, to really guide the development of the junior person. And again, if it's well constructed, it can also serve both as a planning tool as well as an effective communication tool, because it'll encourage communications on the specific topics that are of most importance to the mentee. So I'm giving you here a website for one particular IDP. It's called My IDP. It was developed by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And so it was developed to be broadly applied across a wide range of scientific disciplines. So it certainly is not specific to, injury research, to epidemiology, population health, or clinical research. It basically, it's an interactive web-based tool that starts with a self-assessment on the part of the mentee, the junior person, and I'll show you examples of that, which then leads to, based on an assessment of a variety of skills, values, and interests, what are different career paths and learning opportunities that this particular person should have to guide the development of their career in a direction where the person's going to be most likely to be successful. And again, I would say that these kinds of tools don't necessarily assume one single career path for everyone. So here I've shown you just some screenshots of the assessment section of the MyIDP tool. You see on the left are a set of scientific skills assessments. And you can see the headers there on scientific knowledge, research skills, communications, professionalism. This goes on beyond what I'm showing you here. And this is a self-assessment, so the mentee kind of rates their skill in each of these areas on a scale from 1 to 5. You see on the right their interests assessment, like what is it about the research enterprise that they really seem to enjoy? Do they like writing? Do they like designing experiments? Do they like giving presentations? Guides them through a number of those different interests. And then the values assessment. Why is this person drawn to doing scientific research? Is it about helping society? Is it about working as part of a team? Is it about, do they love the spirit of competition that often comes with research? Like, what are their values? And once you've sort of made those 3 sets of assessments, what are your skills, what are your interests, and what are your values, the tool sort of spits out a summary of that I think can be used by mentees to really help guide a discussion with their mentor about, how to develop their career along a pathway that makes the most sense for that particular individual. And again, it is meant to be a living document that gets revisited with mentors. Again, here at CHOP, our laboratory-based researchers, I think, are far ahead of the rest of us in using tools like this in semi-annual meetings with their mentees to really keep close tabs on how the career development path for their mentees is progressing. And again, this tool, because it is so broad-based, does not assume a single career path. Again, it would point a PhD-trained scientist potentially in the direction of working in industry if that's where it seemed like the alignment of the person's skills, interests, and values was directing them. So this tool is not trying to get everyone to be a successful researcher in a university academic research setting. And that's part of the reason why I like this tool. It doesn't make any assumptions about what the outcome of the person's career should be. It's really about, based on that person's assessment of what they enjoy and what they're good at, how should you help that person develop? And then the last area that I just wanted to touch on for a couple of minutes is work-life integration. This was a module in the Research Mentor Training Program that I helped develop while I was on my sabbatical, because in my own mentoring practice, I had begun to find over the years that work-life integration issues were increasingly becoming significant challenges for junior investigators in academic research settings. And there was a lot of misunderstanding and misperception about whether mentors could even broach this subject with their mentees. And I like this cartoon because it kind of summarizes, I think, the way lots of junior and frankly senior folks feel in a very busy, competitive academic research environment. There simply never appears to be enough time to do all the things that you want to do and do them well. And so the good news, so to speak, is that there's been a lot of progress made in developing programs to guide people through a process where they can achieve better integration of their work and their personal life. And we decided to put a component in the training curriculum on this topic for a couple of specific reasons. One, unmistakably, and this has been my experience in guiding several dozen faculty through this program here at Penn, there is a direct benefit to the mentor of doing some of the activities that I'll share with you in a minute in this work-life integration model, because of course, work-life integration challenges are not reserved just for those at the beginning of their career. They're ever present. And I think that some of the structure that is afforded by this program really provides direct benefit to the mentors, and it gives them practical experience with the program, because essentially we want them to experience the program that I'll tell you about in a minute and then encourage their mentees to do it. And so once you've done it, you can understand better what the mentee's experience will be in it. And again, I think it provides some structure and resources to raise work-life issues with mentees when this can often feel very awkward and uncomfortable to do, and I think sometimes you wonder if you're violating human resources rules and laws. But the fact of the matter is, in my opinion, if you are to be a high-functioning, high-performing mentor, you cannot ignore everything going on in your mentee's life that's outside the four walls of the workday. But I will say this. Having said that, I will say that this is not for every mentor-mentee pair. Sometimes a particular relationship just does not want to broach this subject, and that's okay. What I'm going to share with you is if you're in a mentoring relationship where there's enough trust where you can broach this subject, here's some structure to help you do it. And I wanted to just show you from that multi-center clinical trial that I told you about in the mentor training curriculum, they did collect some data at baseline from both the participating mentors and mentees about their self-assessments of satisfaction with their work life, as well as the balance between their professional and personal lives. And I'm showing you here on this slide a set of bar graphs. You'll see for the mentors there's two sets, how the mentors rated their professional satisfaction, and you can see in general, nearly 80% of the mentors participating rated their satisfaction with their professional life very high, either a 6 or 7 on a 7-point scale. But if you look at the mentor balance satisfaction, it was quite a bit lower. Only about literally half that number of mentors had a similar, high degree of satisfaction with the balance between their personal and professional lives. And the same pattern was seen for the mentees. In general, the mentees had lower levels of satisfaction than their mentors, but you can see the pattern that generally both parties here were more satisfied with just their professional life than with the concept of how that fit into their life in general. And they also asked questions about the level of knowledge that each party had to the other person's personal life. So how much do mentors know about their mentee's personal life and vice versa? And you can see here on this pie chart that for the most part only about a quarter of each group rated their level of knowledge as high, but half or more said they had some moderate degree of understanding. So it's clear that at least in these participating dyads, there was some degree of conversation taking place between mentors and mentees about their life outside of work. And then we did an analysis of those data looking at the predictors of high mentee satisfaction with their personal and professional life. So among those mentees who did say they had a high degree of satisfaction in the balance between their personal and professional lives, interestingly, the mentor's knowledge about the personal life of the mentee was a significant predictor. So this would, among these other items shown here on the slide, so this would suggest that mentees who have mentors who know about their personal life are more likely to provide a high rating of their work-life satisfaction. So again, the purpose of this particular module in the mentor training curriculum is to provide a structure for mentors to learn more about the personal life of their mentees in a way that can be helpful and constructive. And the program that we adapted the materials from was a program that was developed at the Wharton School here at Penn. I discovered this while I was on my sabbatical. It's called Total Leadership, developed by a faculty member here by the name of Stu Friedman. And the basic concept that Stu, and I have to say many others in the area of work-life integration, that the term work-life balance is rapidly becoming outdated and is being replaced with the concept of work-life integration, which is that, you know, these are the four domains that most of us recognize in our lives, and the goal of this program is to get those domains to align a little bit better instead of have tension between them. And just real quickly, because I know we're running a little short on time, the program consists of 3 parts. It really consists of a lot of personal reflection and some guided activities that the person does to make an assessment of where am I now, what are the expectations of the people in my life, and how can I do better. And one of the things that I like about this program is it has this tool called a 4-way assessment, where you ask people to assess in the 4 major domains of their life, how important is that to you, how much of your time and attention does it get, how satisfied are you with that, and how well do you think you're doing. And these are some data that Stu has collected when he's longitudinally assessed outcomes of his program, typically with more business-oriented participants, is that you'll see that when you participate in the program doesn't convince you to make your home life more important than you said it was. That's not what the program is about. But what it does do is it provides a means for you to sort of rebalance your time and attention to come into a little better alignment with how important you thought those various parts of your life were, increases your satisfaction and increases your performance. And the way it does that, again, through a number of self-reflective exercises, it typically results in each participant, conducting what he calls a mini experiment. It's basically a behavior change, a small behavior change that you implement in your life to try to get better alignment of your goals in those 4 different domains. And again, in our experience at Penn to date, we've used that element of the curriculum in the 2013, 14, and 15 sessions that we've done, and we've had uniformly very positive feedback from the participants. This just shows you some evaluation and feedback that we've received here on the participants. And again, we do an assessment of these various skills before we start the training, and then immediately after and 6 months after. And you can see that the self-assessed scores on these various competencies all improve after the training. And so I just will finish with this notion that the kind of take-home message here that I've tried to portray is to simply to be more intentional in your mentoring practice, or if you're listening to this as a mentee, be more intentional about what you're trying to get from your mentor in the relationship. This focus on role clarity, again, knowing if you're in the role of the mentor, what is the role that you're playing for this person, and how does that role complement the role of others that might be part of a mentoring team? And then through the use of some of these tools and resources that I've introduced you to try to be a little bit more structured in your mentoring practice, starting with really simple things like regular standing meetings with an agenda that's controlled by the mentee. This would be, you know, I'm revealing my bias that for the most part the mentee drives the bus. And so when mentors and mentees are coming together, they should be talking about the topics that the mentee thinks are most important to him or her. And then using some of these tools and discussion guides that I've shared with you here, and again, they'll be the websites will be present on the slides that we'll post on the SABRE website, so that you can experiment with those in your own mentoring practice. And so we've got a few minutes left for some questions. I think you're supposed to sort of type your question into the window that you should have available to you on the webinar, and Fred will kind of look those over, and we'll have a discussion about some of those questions. And while we do that, we'll just post here on the screen SABRE's website, the portion of that that directs you to SAVER's mentoring program. That mentoring program is co-directed now by Allison Curry and Ashley Schoenfish, and there can be some additional information that their contact information is on the website, and they can direct you to how the SAVER mentoring program works. And keep in mind that there's both this senior-junior component to the program as well as a peer mentoring component. So I'll pause there, and we can do some questions.
Dennis, thank you so much. As someone who has worked a lot in mentoring, I've really learned a tremendous amount from your presentation, and particularly like those resources that you provided. So as Dennis mentioned, we have about 8 or 9 minutes left for questions. On your screen, there's a little orange box up at the upper left-hand corner, and you can click on that, and then down below you sort of see type message here. You can type in your question. So the first question we have, Dennis, is what are the differences between research mentor and career mentor?
Well, that's a good question. It's actually something we've debated here internally. If we're talking about a clinician scientist in an environment like, an academic medical center, the difference would be that a research mentor may be solely focused on that aspect of the person's career that's really focused on their research, whereas a career mentor might incorporate the person's overall career development, which would also include clinical skills development, teaching skills development, administrative skills development. In environments that are purely research, I think the two terms are generally synonymous. If career development includes only the development of a research career, well, then I think career mentor and research mentor are often the same thing.
Great, thank you. How do you suggest people find mentors?
I think in a resource-rich environment, I think the way they often find mentors is just by talking to their peers and by other members of their group about what their interests are, and their interests lead them to people who have similar interests. And so they tend to start out on that more informal end of the curriculum where the mentoring relationship is really about shared interests. But I've seen increasingly examples where department chairs, division chiefs, sort of powers from on high, if you will, mandate that mentoring relationships must exist, and then have these more arranged marriages. Again, I think that effective mentors can still do that well, even if there's not a lot of shared experience. But then early in that relationship, the mentor should be focused on trying to find other members of the team, whether they be at that institution or elsewhere, that can really augment some content area and methodologic expertise that the mentee is going to need that mentor may not have. So that's one downside to the more arranged marriage version of mentoring. But I see that happening increasingly, even in resource-rich environments, because the powers from on high say that everybody has to have a mentor. But typically it's done through networking and talking to peers and others in the field.
Well, we've tried to do some of that here too, because unfortunately, while everyone recognized that junior faculty should have mentors, junior faculty seem to be reluctant or slow in terms of seeking out mentors. So to some degree, I think that mandate on high may be necessary. Yeah. One of the other questions here is, what is your view on having multiple mentors?
I think it's becoming increasingly absolutely necessary. I know in my own mentoring practice, I find it more and more difficult for me to provide everything that a particular junior faculty member needs, because career development is just increasingly becoming complex and multidimensional. So most of my mentoring relationships do involve teams, and then I think it's a particular challenge to just know how to manage the team. And again, that often falls on the mentee to do that. which is a real challenge. So I think a good mentor is aware of that and assists the mentee in managing the other members of the team.
One of our senior colleagues has written in about the challenges that she's seen in helping a mentor or mentee decide the relationship is not working and move on. So what's your advice about ending a relationship when necessary but without having hard feelings?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I actually have to say that there's a component of the Wisconsin curriculum that does address this issue of ending relationships. Again, I think that when the relationship started out with clearly defined set of expectations and sort of guiding principles, and there was alignment of that, I think it becomes easy for either party, and often both parties, to recognize that we're no longer achieving what we need to achieve. And I think that when mentors have enough self-confidence and self-assurance to acknowledge that they can no longer provide the kind of advice that a particular mentee needs, either because the mentee's interest has changed or because there's a fundamental misalignment of expectations or a challenge with communications that cannot be solved. Again, I think a lot of the tools that I've presented allow you to have those conversations in non-judgmental ways and simply point out situations for what they are, and then a good mentor will take some responsibility for finding another mentor for that mentee. So I think the hard feelings can be avoided when we make more explicit and non-judgmental some of the expectations that people have in relationships and some of the skills that are involved, particularly around communications, because I do see misaligned expectations and ineffective communications as being the two most common reasons that relationships don't go well.
So maybe time for one last question, which is, how do you suggest people find mentors outside of their own departments?
Based on their, well, first of all, often we can't forget, reading the literature in the area that you're interested in will often point you in the direction of the leaders in a field. And so that sometimes involves people outside your institution, not only outside your department. And I think, well-prepared introductions to those people can be made by more senior members at your own institution. Again, I think if a junior person knows that their research by design involves expertise that comes from outside their more narrowly defined division or center or department, they often rely on that division, center, or department leader to make an introduction or to facilitate, access to resources in another department or another center. And again, that's one of those roles of an organizational leader I see as really one of their central roles is to provide those opportunities and those networking with other departments and other groups in the organization. So I would go to departmental center, divisional leadership and ask for assistance there.
Well, Dennis, this has been really terrific. I have learned a tremendous amount and want to thank you personally for doing this. And for our listeners, I'm sure you would agree with me that it's been a very useful hour to have spent with Dennis. Please, for more information about our mentoring program, go to the website saverweb.org/mentor, and as Dennis mentioned, his slides will be posted on the website in the next couple of days. Thank you very much for attending our webinar.